Okay. All right. Murphy, what's the significance of this anniversary of the UDF?
The significance lies in the fact that this indeed is actually our second anniversary that we have to spend under conditions of emergency. You would recall that even last year we had our second anniversary during the first state of emergency that was declared. And the most significant point is that even as the state seeks, in fact, to do away with the UDF at this point in time with this state of emergency, we are still here. Even though we may not celebrate the emergency in the usual way that we would normally have under normal conditions, celebrations will nevertheless go on under different circumstances and in a different tempo altogether.
What is the significance of the UDF today? Does it still hold the sort of power it did when it began?
Oh yes, I think what has happened is that people will tend to look at the strength of the UDF in terms of the rallies that we used to hold, and that when we no longer hold rallies, seeming the appearance may be that we no longer have the strength and the support that we enjoy. I would say that what is happening presently, we have had to adapt quite drastically to the present situation and actually begin to operate in new ways that would ensure that we protect our organization and that would ensure that we are able to prosecute the struggle in sort of under different circumstances and perhaps with a slightly less intensity than we used to before the state of emergency.
And practically, what does that mean? How do you carry out the struggle?
What it means really is that we have certain sets of objectives that we work towards. The one most important one is the whole aspect of deepening our organizational structures at the present time, because what we see with the emergency, whilst it actually seeks to undermine and even to ensure that the UDF and the progressive movement is obliterated. What we have to do as our response, we have in fact to find time to deepen our structures, to strengthen our structures, and also to intensify our mobilization. And apart from that, we have to begin, and we have begun developing strategies that would ensure that we are able to move from the whole aspect of protest onto challenge. That is still in keeping with our resolution of our last National General Council in 1985.
In brief, over the past 3 years, what would you consider to be the UDF's major success?
Our major success, in fact, is demonstrated by the proliferation of mass organizations that we see having sprung up on almost every part of South Africa, right up into the rural areas where, in terms of one of our resolutions a year ago, we sought to take the struggle into the rural areas and begin to activate the rural masses, because it is our belief that without their participation, the sharp edge of our struggle shall in fact be blunted. So what we have done, we have actually broadened the participation, we have actually broadened the basis for unity, and we have more and more forces under, in fact, the auspices of the progressive movement in this country than we had before. And I would say that the present state of emergency, as was the last emergency, actually has thrown up new possibilities that we have begun exploiting with a view towards broadening this base even much more further.
And your major failure over the past 3 years?
I would say that one of our failures would have been that of not having been able to be always on the spot in terms of our responses to state initiatives. I would say to some extent we have had in fact to contend with the state machinery that was extremely vicious, and that our methods of adapting to that have not really been as rapid as we would have liked them to be. And I would say that presently we are actually getting out of that impasse.
The government, in its most strident terms, sometimes calls the UDF a radical communist organization intending to overthrow the government. Is the UDF trying to do that, and is it a radical communist-inspired organization?
Well, they would call us radical, they would call us communists, but the point of the matter is that we are fighting against apartheid, and it is our stated intention to work towards the final dismantling and demolition of apartheid. And what that means is that we actually see our role, our historic role, as that of having to mobilize our people to give the sort of direction that would actually channel the energies that our masses are able to actually exert into a direction that would ensure that white minority domination in our country is banished forever. And that is what they call communist inspired, in fact, objectives. And I would say that if by fighting to demolish apartheid, if by fighting to undo the evils of apartheid, one becomes a communist, then we'll plead guilty to the charge. But
is it not the fact, though, in all practical terms, that the government has been quite effective in cracking down on opposition, particularly during the emergency?
Well, as I stated earlier, they have, of course, sort of disrupted some of our programs. But it is true to say that at the present point in time, unlike the last emergency, under the present emergency, we have emerged in a much more better position than we were before. And whilst it is the government's stated intention, we have been in fact very much aware of that even long before they declared the state of emergency, and we had then begun making the necessary preparations to be able to sustain our operations.
One of the reasons the government declared the emergency it claims was because of the rising tide of black-on-black violence. What's your response to that?
We refute that assertion completely. It actually is an assertion that emanates from the corridors of Pretoria, lastly because it seeks to placate or it seeks to confuse international opinion about what the nature of the problem in this country is. The cause for the declaration of the emergency is nothing more than the increasing inability of the government to maintain its rule in the old way. And the only resort such regimes have is always to introduce such dictatorial measures.
Do you think the government is actually sowing the seeds of black-on-black violence? Are they, by taking the leaders out of the community, inciting blacks to commit violence against other blacks?
There has been clear proof, in fact, implicating the authorities, or at least the police, in complicity in some of the acts of violence in the townships against certain individuals in our townships, and then they would then come up and claim those as being victims of black-on-black violence. Whilst one cannot deny the fact that in the process of struggle, in the course of the fighting that goes on in the townships, even blacks do get hurt and do get injured, as it can happen in any war situation. That is the case in South Africa. But then the state, because it has the monopoly of the media, has the monopoly of the television, the radio, and even controls the newspapers to some extent by its laws, it is able to bring out such propaganda as to project the struggle in this country as being purely black on black, and they present themselves as coming out to be the keepers of peace. I think that the Gwandebele situation, when the people of Gwandebele stood up to fight against independence, we had a situation there where blacks actually were fighting against those blacks who were on the side of the Afrikaners. So the question of color in these issues is not of primary concern. The important thing is, what does the person, or what do the group of persons actually represent? In that case, we had Skosana representing Pretoria's interests, and we had the majority of the people fighting, in fact, against independence. And so it is quite clear that when finally the assembly in Gwandebele decided against independence, it was not because they saw wisdom, it was more because of the pressure from the grassroots level.
The Sowetan today came out apparently in an editorial and condemned the necklace for its method.
Well, as the UDF, we've always stated that we do not see it our business to go out of our way to call for people to exercise violence upon other individuals. And insofar as the necklace method is concerned, and even insofar as other deaths of blacks are concerned, we are of the view that the objective situation would need to be taken into account. Presently, for example, since the Bureau of Information began churning out information about so-called unrest, it is interesting to know that there has been a situation where I would say that about three-thirds or three-quarters of the reports on deaths would be reported as necklace deaths, which is an interesting phenomenon, which is something that never used to be before the Bureau started broadcasting news. So it is quite clear that they are beginning now to inflate and even exaggerate this whole question.
All right, but the fact itself that we do, for example, know that there is necklacing going on, is it a proper means of taking out collaborators? Would the UDF support that sort of method against those who are seen as collaborating with the government?
Well, if one talks of that, of whether would that be a proper means, the immediate question then would be, what would one consider as a proper means to kill an informer, to kill a person who sells the whole nation, in fact, to the enemy? The question here, I think, is not so much whether death by necklace is better or worse than death by a bullet. So what we have in the township, we have death taking place through various forms. Only thing that we believe and we think that this whole necklace thing is being blown out of proportion. Whilst as an organization, we cannot see our way clear to supporting that kind of action.
Okay. Finally, your hopes for the UDF in the coming days ahead. Is morale high enough that you think the UDF will carry through with its targets?
I think the morale within our ranks is extremely high, especially because we consider ourselves as having been able to see our way through this present phase of the state of emergency. And what we are seeing in the townships in places like Soweto, there is in fact an intensified effort towards creating deeper organizational structures among the masses in the streets, where you find that at an intensive rate, street committees have been formed in most of the townships in Soweto. And that in fact is the trend of things as it is presently. So our biggest task is to ensure that that spreads even far wider than places like Soweto.
Specifically, though, are there any targets of opportunity that you hope to hit on in the coming days? Schools, town councils? I mean, are there any specifics that you're going to target?
Yes, we have, apart from the campaign against education going on, apart from the rand boycott, we have in fact presently begun to re-intensify the campaign against the tricameral parliament, as witnessed by some of the advertisements calling for the resignation of the members of the House of Delegates and Representatives, calling on them to distance themselves from the Nationalist Party in the state of emergency. So we're having that as in fact one aspect or one campaign that we'll be pursuing. Over and above that, our general thrust against apartheid at all the levels is going to continue. And as a matter of fact, that will actually get more stronger as more and more people join our ranks. And it is therefore in this light that we actually are coming out much more stronger now in calling for much more greater unity amongst the oppressed and exploited people, and calling for the broadest possible alliance of progressive forces to fight against apartheid.
So despite the emergency and despite the arrest of 8,000 detainees at least, there is no leadership vacuum in the UDF today?
Absolutely no leadership vacuum.
I mean, it is continuing as...
Continuity, in fact, is our trademark as of now.
Is there anything, Rap, any questions you had? Anything we missed?
No.
No? Okay. Have you read the Sweden editorial today?
No, I haven't read newspapers, so we have been working on it here.
So tomorrow we shouldn't look for any specific plans anywhere. I mean, we can't go. There are no rallies that are specifically being.
Yeah, no, we won't be having any rallies. We won't be having even a press conference.
All right, now that the camera, I mean, they're not rolling anymore. The camera's